Branding does not stop when your logo is delivered. Today, we are going to be talking all about how to bring your brand's experience to life throughout your guest experience. So buckle in and let's get creative. Welcome to the Brand and Market Podcast, the show for short-term rental owners who want to turn their listings into legacies. I'm your host, Allie Haney, owner and co-host of multiple properties and founder of Brand and Market, where we help Airbnb hosts and short-term rental investors build intentional brands, smart marketing systems, and guest experiences that actually move the needle. Each week, I share practical strategies, real-life stories, and behind-the-scenes insights to help you attract the right guests, increase bookings, and run your rental like a business, so you too can be the best in your brand and your market. Let's dive in. Welcome back, y'all. I'm excited to do this week's Wednesday Wins segment where I celebrate a win that one of my clients had. This week, we are celebrating Stacy, who is the owner of Acadia Evergreen Retreat. Acadia Evergreen is in Bar Harbor, Maine, and it is right outside of Acadia National Park. There's obviously lots of evergreens, those rocky beaches that you associate with New England. They are about 10 minutes away from the entrance of Acadia Harbor National Park. They have a ton of kid-friendly amenities, and after purchasing the property last year, they went all in on an interior redesign, and they also went all in on brand design and creating a direct booking site. I'm going to link that direct booking site below in the show notes. So if your family is looking for their summer vacation and you guys have young kids, this is especially the place for you. And perhaps it could even turn into a tradition where your family goes year after year and books direct with Stacy and avoids all of the OTA fees. So congratulations to you, Stacy, and to Acadia Evergreen Retreat being live, launched, and out in the wild. I'm so proud of you guys, and I'm honored to be part of the project. And I personally cannot wait to bring my family to Maine. I've never been, and so it's on our bucket list now. Let's dive into today's topic, which is all surrounding brand activations. Ooh, what does that mean? You've probably never even heard of that term before. I can't remember if I made it up or not, but it is basically bringing your brand and your brand strategy to life so that people can actually experience it. And it's not just a document that's sitting on your hard drive. I think one of the biggest things that happens, even for my clients that go through the full brand strategy process and the brand design process, once that process is complete, they sometimes struggle with how to implement that brand into the property. And that's what the goal of this episode is today, is to help you figure out how exactly to do that so that that brand strategy doesn't just sit in some Canva document on, your hard drive that you never look at again. So at this point, let's say you have your brand strategy and your brand design complete. You have all of those values laid out. You know exactly who your ideal guest is. You know what makes your property different. But now we have to go and we have to implement this into our rental. You've got your colors, you've got your logo, you've got your fonts. Okay, but then what? So we allow that strategy to be our foundation on top of which we can start to build those brand activations. And brand activations are what makes people feel the experience. It's what leaves them with some sort of feeling that they can then attach to you, to the rental itself. It's how people experience your brand beyond just seeing the logo on your website. Let me give you some examples because sometimes, again, like branding feels a little bit intangible until you have a concrete example that you can kind of latch onto. Everybody knows Starbucks, right? One of the things that you almost all, like 99.9% of the time, can count on happening at Starbucks is that they write your name on your cup. That simple thing is a brand activation. That's something that happens repeatedly that makes you feel some sort of way. For me, when I see my name on the cup, I get a little like warm and fuzzy feeling. Not only is it helping them logistically to make sure that I'm the Allie that gets the right order for the iced chai with 3 pumps of vanilla and a shot of espresso, but it's also like, oh, they know me, like they have my name, except for when they spell it wrong. But that's a story for another time. How about IKEA, another big brand, right? Anytime that you go to IKEA, you know that you're going to get two things. You are going to wander aimlessly through this, like, it's not really a maze. It's kind of just a path that they guide you around. But at the very end of that path, what is there going to be? There's going to be meatballs at the cafeteria, brand activation. Honestly, other than like the Swedish connection, I don't know that there is any other connection to that brand. I've not done a ton of research into it, but I know that I associate those meatballs with IKEA. I know that I'm going to get them every single time that I go. How about let's do Magnolia. That's one that probably a lot of people in my short-term rental space are familiar with. Magnolia, Chip and Joanna Gaines. Fixer Upper is the TV show where they flip the houses. That is an activation of the overall brand of Magnolia. So it's something that happens often that reinforces the design of Joanna, the personality of Chip. We're using that avenue or that activation to feed back up into the parent brand of Magnolia. So you can see that like those concrete examples make the activations a little bit easier to understand and figure out how to, I had one more written here down in my notes and I can't believe I almost forgot it. Okay, Dairy Queen. You know, when you go to Dairy Queen and at the very end, if you order a Blizzard before they give it to you, what do? They flip that bad boy over because that's like their signature move. It's just something so simple, but it's something that is being trained for every single employee that is delivering those Blizzards. They know that they have to tip it over and make sure it doesn't fall out of the cup before they hand it to you. So those very simple, repeatable actions that make you feel some sort of way, that make you associate that action with that business, those are all brand activations. They create recognition, they create consistency. And although this sounds kind of silly when you're thinking about Swedish meatballs or your name being written on a cup, they actually deepen the emotional connection to the person or the business that is providing them to you. All right, now let's take it kind of out of everyday world and apply these brand activation concepts to the world of short-term rentals. I think a lot of people think, okay, again, I have my logo, my colors are in there, check, 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 check. All of those are good things. I don't want to like discount the fact that you have gotten to that level of being consistent in your visual branding. That's absolutely important for consistency and ultimately familiarity. That builds trust. But the property in and of itself is not going to be the brand. You have to build the brand around that property or around that experience. One thing that I see a lot of people in the short-term rental or hospitality space do is that they'll stop almost at the amenity phase or the amenity like point in the process. So they have the property and now they're adding all of these amenities. Let's use wellness because that one is pretty common right now. Okay, so you have a sauna, you have a cold plunge, and you have a place to do yoga. Okay, those all definitely contribute to the brand, but them standing alone is not going to be the brand. We have to find ways to be able to walk people through the experience if you want this to be a wellness-focused brand. In my brand strategy documents, I always include these brand activations, and I'll dive a little bit deeper into that later. So I do try to brainstorm this with my clients or for my clients prior to handing that brand strategy document over so that they have some of these ideas flowing when they are done and complete with the brand strategy phase of our process. But I want to take it a little bit further and give you some examples of ways that you can activate your brand within your short-term rental. I'm going to give you some examples from real clients of mine that I have helped implement these strategies into their brands. So first is Acadia Evergreen. We just talked about them. They just launched, but one of the brand activations that I included in their brand strategy document was including a pine, P-I-N-E, or evergreen scented Pura, like the wall plugins, so that like right inside the door when people walk in, so that the smell immerses them as soon as they walk in. So now they know, they have a mat at the welcome area on the front porch that says Acadia Evergreen Retreat. They're surrounded by evergreens, actual evergreens at the property. And then they walk in and they're met with the smell of evergreens inside the house too. Do you see how that immerses you into an experience more so than just having that mat that has Acadia Evergreen Retreat written on it? There's a difference in that. There's a little bit of nuance in that. And quite frankly, I think some of the best brand activations are ones that you don't even necessarily realize. You just have to experience them and you leave feeling fulfilled. You leave feeling reset. You leave feeling, the way that you were intended to feel, but you can't quite put your finger on it as to why. That, to me, is a signature of having a really thorough and incredible brand. Example number 2 is at one of the rentals that I co-host for. It is called Homestead at Cunningham Creek. Okay, so immediately within the name Homestead, that sounds like it's a farm stay, which it is. And it's at Cunningham Creek. There is actually a creek on the property that the house overlooks. Okay. All of those things contribute to the brand as a whole. So I don't want to detract from that and say, just because you only have a name doesn't mean that you're not doing branding correctly. Okay. You're still moving in the right direction. I'm just trying to figure out how to dive deeper and make the experience more immersive. Like I mentioned, it's a farm stay. Typically at this rental, it sleeps 12. So we have large multi-generational families. A lot of the branding is the copy is surrounding like taking it back to the good old days or making your good old days, living out the good old days for your kids and your grandkids. And so it's got this very nostalgic farm stay feel to it, both in the interior design and the brand design and in the experience when you drive up to the property on a gravel driveway. The property set on 15 acres. What is a way that we can continue to bring that brand to life through avenues that we already have access to? Well, one of the things that this owner does is that for every guest that arrives, that guest is going to have a dozen farm fresh eggs from the chickens that are on that property every single time. And tell me that that's not a memorable experience. This property specifically is right outside of a couple of major cities, Charlottesville, Richmond, Washington, D.C. So a lot of people are coming to this central location from more urban areas. And so when they come to this rural 15-acre property that's a farm stay, and they are met with farm fresh eggs that they may have never even had before, that is a remarkable brand activation because it's going to leave them feeling some type of way, that they're experiencing something new, that they are creating their own good old days and their own memories to be able to tell those memories to their children and grandchildren in the future. Next brand activation is for a rental called Tennessee Together. And I can't take credit for this one. This was one that the owner created and thought of after I created the brand. But Tennessee Together is I think I've talked about this extensively in the past. I might have done like a whole episode on it. But Tennessee Together is a 1-bed, 1-bath studio cabin in Pigeon Forge, Tennessee. It does not have internet. And we turned that, what seemed to be a weakness at first, into their differentiator. On top of that, we found different ways for the couples to be able to connect outside of just being offline. Even though they don't have internet, they still do have some cell service. So as a like visual and mental trigger, the owner has put a box that was specifically labeled for phones to go into when the couples arrive. So now not only do they not have internet, they are putting their phone away, physically away, so that that is not a distraction from them and their relationship and their time to reconnect after being, hit by life, like everyday life. This is their respite. This is their retreat away from everyday life. And we are going to find every single way to be able to have those connections, including putting your phone away. One other brand activation that they did, because their whole brand is around togetherness and bringing a couple like to rekindle their love, is the conversation cards. They have conversation cards within the rental that allow you to have conversations with your partner or your spouse that perhaps you haven't had in a while because everyday life just gets in the way. You're talking about logistics with kids and who's going to pick up who from soccer practice and what time your dentist appointment is and how your day was at work. But like those deep conversations that sometimes you have at the beginning of your relationship, but subside toward once you get a little bit farther along in your relationship, have been together a little bit longer, they are going to set the whole entire stage for you to be able to have those successful reconnection conversations. And that, my friend, is a brand activation. Look, y'all know the tagline for this podcast is turning listings into legacies. We start a short-term rental business for one of two reasons. We either really love real estate or we really love hospitality. But what if I told you that you could do both and do them both well? Lodgify is how I do that. I can run an operationally sound and therefore profitable business while also loving on my guests and leaving some margin for some unreasonable hospitality. Lodgify can help you create your own direct booking site, manage your reservations and guest messages, automate the back end of your business, and stop depending entirely on other platforms that you don't control. Lodgify helps you build your business, something sustainable, something that allows you to love on your guests, and something that helps you turn your listing into a legacy. Use my code BMPOD20 for a special discount until the end of July. That's BMPOD20 for 20% off all yearly Lodgify plans. Cheers, y'all. Those are all for standalone short-term rentals. And I wanted to try and challenge myself to brainstorm some that were going to be specific to boutique hotels or micro resorts, because overall, like a single standalone property is going to have different parameters or different boundaries that they can't operate outside of, versus like a boutique hotel that might have a little bit more like community-based things, right? So like you go to a short-term rental, it's just going to be like you or your family, you or your spouse. Like it's going to be an immediate group of people. There's not going to be strangers there. Versus at a boutique hotel or micro resort, you might run into someone that you've never met before. I thought this would be a cool opportunity to do some like community-based activations that could be specifically for boutique hotels or micro resorts. And I used a real life example, and then I kind of just brainstormed and was able to be creative and make one up. So the first one is, I've never been to Bolt Farm Treehouse, but I've listened to a lot of podcasts. I have studied their brand. Their brand is absolutely incredible. And one of the things that they do for their like welcome sequence, the welcome experience, is that they are immediately, like anybody who checks in at Bolt Farm Treehouse is immediately handed a glass of champagne. I think that that is like, obviously it takes more staff in order to be able to do that. And something like a micro resort or a boutique hotel would potentially have the budget in order to be able to facilitate that. But when I arrive somewhere and I'm immediately handed a glass of champagne, there's something that goes off inside of my brain that like, it turns off the stress and turns on the like, I'm being pampered. I am being thought of. Somebody thought of this before I even arrived. And so now I'm in this headspace to be able to receive. And in the context of Bolt Farm Treehouse, much like Tennessee Together, they are specifically focused on couples and reconnecting couples. And so if I am immediately handed a glass of champagne, and then that night after check-in, once we get settled in, they have a happy hour, I think, almost every single night. It's like, it's opening it up, like my brain and my psyche up to connection, not just to connection with my spouse, but kind of like priming me with connection to other people at this happy hour in order to be able to make space for that deep connection with my spouse later on. I think that's a really like simple way for that like action to be associated with a brand. And I'm left with the feeling of like openness and calmness and being taken care of and seen. So that's another brand activation that could be used for a micro resort or a boutique hotel. Now, I'm going to use one of my other clients as an example. I told you I got a little bit creative, so I haven't presented this idea to them yet. They might hear it live on the podcast today. But the next example is for a property called the Billy Motel. The Billy Motel is a 10-bedroom motel in Davis, West Virginia. The brand was already created before me, but one of the pieces of the brand that I really want to hone in on is that it embodies this hillbilly fabulous overall vibe and aesthetic. When I asked one of the co-owners what hillbilly fabulous meant to him, okay, I might butcher this, but so sorry in advance. It is a state of mind that brings together the best parts of Appalachian culture, as well as very progressive and accepting and inclusive people. And so it's like, yes, we are in the mountains of West Virginia, but we are also very open to culture, to arts, to creativity, to different lifestyles. And so I think one way that the Billy could incorporate that overall brand into an activation is potentially to have like once a month having live music or a meet and greet with a local artist, with some of the artists that they have their artwork on the walls. Like how cool would that be to like bring in those local people to be able to talk to them, to praise their work, to create a larger community around like the local community and bringing others like tourists into that local community. So using whatever parts of your brand are going to stick out to your ideal guests the most and incorporating those into your activations is what's going to make it feel aligned. Okay, the last type of activation that I want to talk about is specifically, we've done short-term rentals, we've done boutique hotels and micro resorts, and now I want to do personal brands. And one of the things that I found for personal brands and the way that they can create those activations the best is actually not through an experience, because a personal brand doesn't have like a physical location that people go to, right? They might have a service offering, yes, but let's talk about even like before we get to the point of offering that service in a personal brand. Let's think about how we are going to get them to say yes to that personal brand and become familiar with them through a brand activation. I like to think of brand activations for personal brands as content series. So what's a content series that we can use over and over and over again, to the point where it feels familiar and relatable to the guests or the client that we are trying to bring on? Okay, well, let me chat with you about one of my personal brand clients. One of their values is to always see the gap and the gain. Okay, they focus on the gain. And so on Mondays, every Monday, he gets on Instagram stories and he says, okay, these are my goals for the week. And then on Friday, he gets on Instagram stories and says, okay, these are the goals that I have achieved. This is how far I got. I'm going to focus on this positive silver lining item. And then next week, I'm going to tackle it again. So on Mondays, he always goes through and tells us what the gap is. And then on Fridays, he always tells us what the gain is. And so that is allowing that content series, and thus that brand activation that is specifically centered around one of his brand's values, is allowing people to get to know him, to get to trust him, and ultimately potentially either become a consulting client, a future investor in one of their deals. All of these doors open for him simply because he's getting on Instagram stories and utilizing a content series that specifically speaks directly to his brand's values. I hope that this is giving you some insight into how to be able to take your brand, take your strategy, take your colors and your logos, and actually implement them into something that somebody can feel. Now, if I had to give you a step-by-step process to do this, first, I would say that you are going to have to intimately know who your ideal guest or your ideal client is. You have to know what they want. You have to know what they desire, what keeps them up at night, what problems or challenges they're facing. And you have to put a name to this person. Like, I don't want you to just say they are a mom of two. Okay, tell me more about that person. What is that mom of two doing? What is she, when she wakes up every morning, what does her typical day look like? I want you to be as in her head as possible. Then once you have that ideal guest or client avatar, I want you to think about in your real life, like the actual people that you know. Do you know of somebody that matches that description? Because if so, anytime you're thinking about implementing a brand activation, all you have to do is go to that person and say, do you find value in this? Would this make you feel this type of way? And that's just a really simple form of market research, which is going to ensure that you're not wasting your time doing something that you think your ideal guest or your ideal client wants when really they may not. Make sure you know who they are intimately, who you're trying to serve. Make sure that the thing that you're doing actually does serve them. And then you can start the brainstorm process of, how am I going to activate this brand throughout all of my guest experience? One way I like to start that brainstorm is by thinking about the 5 senses. And this might sound really simple, but if I wanted to immerse my guests into a brand and its experience, what better way to do that than by appealing to each and every one of those senses? So touch, taste, hear, smell, and see. And I do this in my brand strategy document for my short-term rentals, is I try to create one idea for each of those individual categories so that they can implement that into their rental and have that immersive brand experience. I think sometimes people overcomplicate what it means to have brand activations, and they could be as elaborate as like a scavenger hunt for the kids to do upon check-in when mom and dad are unloading the car. On the opposite end of the spectrum, could be as simple as having throw pillows and blankets in your brand colors. Both are going to feel immersive. They're just going to feel immersive in different ways. But the more ways that you have those brand activations activated, then you're going to feel completely engulfed in that experience. So the 5 senses brainstorm will probably it'll start the brainstorm, but you'll probably be led to other ideas throughout that brainstorm. Like, for example, the conversation cards for couples. That's not necessarily specifically aligned with any of those five senses, but it's going to, the five senses brainstorm could lead you there. The two questions that I want you to keep coming back to when you're thinking of these brand activations are, first, does it appeal to my ideal client? If the answer is no, you should immediately chuck it. If the answer is yes, then I want you to ask yourself, what do I want this ideal guest to feel when I implement this? And then an extra added bonus, once you decide what those activations are going to be throughout your brand, I want you to try and find a way to systemize them as best as possible. For example, if you decide that you want those purists that are going to immerse them in scent as soon as they walk in, order the subscription, put them on a subscription so that they regularly just arrive to either the property, to your cleaner, to you, whoever's in charge of that, so that like you don't have to think about that every month or every quarter when it's time to order them. It's already done for you automatically. If you decide to have the box with the for the cell phones, make sure that it's on the cleaner's list to place that box in the same spot at every single turnover. And that way it's systemized so that you can ensure that that experience is going to happen for every single guest. Because this consistency, it'll bring trust, it'll bring familiarity, so that like when a potential guest reads in a review that like how awesome it was to be able to have the scent welcome them through the front door, that the next guest that books because of that comment is also going to have that same experience. So that's what we want, is consistency in that brand experience. So to tie this up in a bow, you've heard me say before, your logo is not your brand. Your color palette in and of itself is not your brand. Your website is not your brand. All of those things support the brand as a whole. But where your brand truly comes to life is through the experiences that people have with it and the feelings that are left with those people that are experiencing it. From here, I challenge you to come up with one new brand activation for either your short-term rental, your boutique hotel, your micro resort, or your personal brand. And when you come up with that brand activation, slide into my DMs and tell me at brandandmarket.co on Instagram and all platforms. I check Instagram most often. So if you message me there, you will get a message back. So I'm excited to hear how you are going to bring the experience of your brand to life. And cheers to being the best in your brand and your market. Till next time, y'all. You just completed another episode of the Brand and Market Podcast. If you found this helpful, please rate, review, and subscribe to help others find this show and so that you never miss an episode. Don't forget to take a look at the show notes for all the resources mentioned today. See you next Wednesday, and as always, I'm here cheering you on as you build your dream brand and business.